Hello and welcome to week 26 of the FUT Weekly podcast. As mentioned on the supporter content episode, we're halfway through the cycle. So we're going to talk a bit about gameplay overall, the community approach to it, things like that. We'll also cover your regular tips, tricks, tactics, all that good stuff. We introduce, as we so often do, first of all, AirJapes, FUT Legend, of course. Welcome back.
Thank you much, Ben. Happy to be back and happy to be trying to help be the solution to gameplay, not part of the problem.
Yeah. And we also have with us 𝗏𝘅𝘀𝘀, who people will, of course, be familiar with as a top two, just behind Japes, NA Player. Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on the content pod and the gameplay pod this week, so looking forward to getting into it.
The old double bill, and we have an expert when it comes to gameplay, known, of course, for his tutorial videos. It's NealGuides. Welcome back.
Thank you very much for having me on again. I really appreciate it. Good to be back.
Always good to have you on. And before we get into gameplay proper, interested to hear, Hugh, about your experience. Was it last weekend going into champs with a full gold non-rare team? How did you get on?
Got to 13 wins, lost 2 games on penalties, so almost had the 14 wins, but unfortunately not to be.
And who was the standout from that group?
Really just the forwards were really good. I had 𝘵𝘠𝘬𝘠𝘬 and I think it's 𝘵𝘇𝗵𝗪𝘀𝘐. They're both League On players. I was just using like a kind of basic 4-3-3-2, the second variation that is. But yeah, just tried to keep it simple, just like focused on not rushing, like, you know, playing the extra pass, not just like sprinting at defenders. And when you have worse players in your team, it kind of forces you to do that. I feel like every few weeks, maybe every couple months, I like to, you know, change the tactics, change the team, and just kind of go back to basics and reset. Because I think a lot of the times you can kind of get very used to how your team plays and you start kind of automatically playing certain passes, just assuming it'll be there. But, you know, the gameplay changes, opponents changes, and then you just get in a rut because you're just like playing on autopilot. You're not like really thinking. So I like to do that kind of reset every now and then, like be more intentional in like my gameplay.
Yeah. I quite like Silver Stars for that, actually. Although, I don't know, the Silver Stars suddenly become so good at this point in the cycle. It's not necessarily as different. But yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Any particular, I guess, gameplay learnings from doing that? Like apart from, I guess, you know, playing it simple.
Yeah, I think I would say, and I don't mean this in like a nihilistic way, but like the players you use aren't that important. You have to spend a lot of coins to buy players that will like win you games on their own. We're talking like prime R9, Team of the Year 𝗵𝗫𝗍, like that kind of player. And otherwise, it's really just like the basics and, you know, knowing, you know, how opponents tend to play, you know, proactively player switching and not getting caught out and not like sprinting through the midfield with players who aren't very good and like losing the ball and getting countered. Like people talk so much about how annoying it is to get countered, and it definitely is. But then people also don't really make an effort to do things that will help them not get countered. And they think it's like a depth thing, but really it's more of like a where you lose the ball thing. Like not trying to sprint all the time. And when your entire team's forward and you take like a bad shot from 30 yards that gets blocked and now you're getting countered. Okay, well, why were you shooting from there? That's more of the issue than however high your depth is, or if your center back has 99 sprint speed versus 92 or something like that.
Yeah. And in terms of that, do you think then people are basically, a lot of the reason people get countered is because they play risky passes in build up? Would you say? I mean, is that the most obvious thing that people could probably do to prevent themselves getting countered?
Yeah, I think especially if, say, you've been under pressure and like you're getting frustrated and you win the ball back and you just want to do like a RB and A, like a driven pass, like, or a through ball, and just like right away, like you're like, let's go, I want to score. And then it's just like, you're just asking to get like lose the ball and get countered again. Or if someone's pressing you and you try to just like sprint through it because you think, oh, if I can sprint past this one guy, then I'll be able to score. But then you just like run right into someone else. So just like, you can definitely take your time much more than you think you can, I think is like one of the main lessons.
Also, real quick on the folks that are, if you are getting countered, if you're someone that is not good at maybe manual defending, or maybe just don't play like press on possession loss, or like there are certain tactics that you're going to put yourself in some tricky situations and that are prone to getting countered. And if you're getting annoyed with it, maybe just don't play that.
Yeah, it's really important if you play press after possession loss that you aren't losing the ball. Just while we're talking about this, Neil, anything to kind of add on that, like losing the ball, press after possession loss, these kind of basics that might mean that people are losing when they don't necessarily need to be?
Yeah, just similar to like what 𝘬𝘬𝘀𝘀 was saying. I'm actually doing a Division 10 to Elite Division series of just basic gameplay, and coming towards the latter end, I changed to a cheaper team using the same style just to show that you can still do it with a weaker team. And there's two things I noticed this year is that defensive awareness, it's with a cheaper player. I don't know about 𝘬𝘬𝘀𝘀, but I found that it's such a big difference. And I found it like that and passing was probably the two biggest issues that I had, because as you said, when you're on autopilot, you're used to just making a driven pass or a risky pass here and there. But it's when you lose the ball and you get counter-attacked, I think that's when you're in trouble. I think the key, in my opinion, is you need to switch early. If you see the danger, especially if you see a driven pass coming and you're expecting it, I just say switch early. And I always, in my opinion, always go for the fastest potential centre backs that I can have. I try to put shadows, 99 sprint speed on all of them. So even if I am playing nonchalantly and I make a mistake, at least I've got a bit of pace that can recover. But I think, you don't want to lose the ball in the first 2/3, but you have to be very careful when you build up. I always say play a safe pass in the first 2/3 if it's close range. If it's like an L1 triangle over the top. But in the final third, if you lose the ball, you're fine. But the key thing is with one of your CDMs, a lot of players, they try to launch forward when they lose the ball in the final third with their CDM as opposed to running back. So I think a lot of the time they run out with their CDM and then they're left with a back three up against like two strikers. And I think that's where the real issues start. So I would say if you lose the ball, especially in the final third, instead of a CDM launching forward, just kind of lean back a little bit, stay, have a look around, maybe run back first. And then if you want to go forward, only kind of rush forward and make a foul or a tactical foul if you know you're going to get that ball 100% is what I'd say.
Oh, those are such the annoying type of players to play against. Like, just come try to tackle me, right? That's what we all want.
Yeah.
The players that like never use any type of second man press, they only switch between two CMs or DMs and just sort of like shuffle back and forth, are extraordinarily boring to play against and break down. But it's very sound defending.
Yeah, it's very attrition based.
Yeah, you're just not the big flaw with the AI this year for me, and Ben, I messaged you about this briefly, is that if you manually take a defender out of position to press someone, the defensive AI doesn't say, this player, like the guy next to me has been pulled out of position and I need to make sure to cover this space. But the attacking AI says, look at all this space that's been created. I'm going to go run into it. And so it creates all of these really like frustrating interactions where, I'm thinking to myself, like, of course my center back will slide over, like the whole defensive line will shift and slide over in this when I like pull forward with my left back to press the right forward in a 4-3-2-1, or maybe I pull forward with my one of my center backs to press that. And I think, okay, the other two will shift over to help cover that, but they don't. And instead, the attacking AI says, this player's out of position. I'm going to attack this space. And that's why there's like huge levels of frustration when it comes to, AI positioning, and why you benefit from not pressing.
Yeah. You were saying this to me and I totally agree. Yeah. I think that it's a really good point about, and we're going to talk a bit about gameplay issues later. And I think you're absolutely right. Like the biggest issue is your defenders are so poor at dealing with overloads, with basically a lot of the now quite advanced AI attacking movement that has been introduced, I think, between last cycle and this cycle, really. The defensive AI is just not keeping up with that. And you see it all the time, these just like stupid decisions that extremely high defensive awareness players are making. And I think you mentioned the importance of defensive awareness, Neil. And I think it's true, like the difference between players when they have high defensive awareness compared to not high, and I'm talking like even a +5 difference, I think is quite big. But even when you have very good defensive awareness players, they're still getting basically ruined by really good attacking AI that has come into the game this year, in my opinion. And I think it's one of the biggest problems. And it's one of the reasons why you see such a counter-attacking kind of meta, I think, in the game at the moment. Neil, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think Jake's right. I mean, if I had a game, if I could make a game, it would be fully manual. Like maybe AI would only track a run if the AI is running, but within limits. But of course, it just cannot be that way. I would want it to be. But the reason why I say with the CDM is run back is because what a lot of players don't realize, the average player, is when they run forward with the left analog stick, it's facing the opposite way. So when they switch to a defender, they don't realize, but they're still holding the left analog stick to the attacking third. So that is where a lot of people actually get done by the counter attack. It's because they're normally launching forward with like a center mid and all doing something, just running towards the opponent. And then if someone does an L1 triangle, even if they change the correct player in time, they might have low player moving assistance, but sometimes it takes a long time for that left analog stick to go all the way around. So that's why I just say, just be careful with that left analog stick as well. So if you, for example, if you're worried that there's going to be a driven pass or a through ball in behind, maybe if you want to be aggressive, still do, but then get ready to move that left analog stick and flick it across is what I would say.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Hugh, from your perspective, do you think that there's an imbalance this year with attacking AI, and also, I guess, what are the balance issues that you've found this cycle?
Yeah, I would agree that there's definitely an imbalance. I think it seems like oftentimes the AI just wants to keep dropping back further and further. Like in real life, like you try to hold some sort of line. Like obviously if the ball's already in the box, then you're just scrambling to do whatever you have to. But especially like how many times have you seen when you have the ball on the edge of the box and there's like 6 defenders in the box and like they're not even necessarily marking anyone. And it's just like, why are they there? Like in real life, there would be no reason for them to be that deep, like as deep as like the 6-yard box. And that's what ends up leading to a lot of like those auto blocks, which I think have gotten better from last year. But it just feels like they just keep dropping deeper and deeper. Like a player from the attacking team makes a run, one defender will track the run for no reason, like way too deep. And instead of just stopping and coming back to everyone else, then the whole line just drops to that player. And it just like keep getting pushed further and further back, which then makes it hard when you do win the ball back if the opponent has press after possession loss, because you have so many players so far back, even if you don't want them to, that then it's hard to play out because you don't have anyone to like pass it out to. So then you just end up getting kind of stuck in your own half. And really the only good way to get out is like pass it wide and then play a through ball because there's so much space because everyone's so far into one half.
Yeah.
So it like feeds into itself that like the more you push up on the ball, the more exposed you are to the counter. But if you don't push up, the defense is so deep that it's hard to score. So it's like you either have to score really fast or be extremely patient. And I think everyone gets kind of annoyed with both, like players who just hold the ball and players who just span through balls, and it feels like there's no in between.
Yeah, I think that's true. We'll come back to talking about kind of gameplay tips and things like that in a sec, because we have started talking about the game more generally. And I noticed JKL was saying that his biggest gripe is the community at large, which he says has latched onto elements of the game EA doesn't fix to make it a worse experience for everyone. Manual defending is, at this point in the cycle, a detriment due to how agile attackers are. I was interested to get thoughts on the actual manual defending one-on-one, because I personally haven't really found that too much of an issue, actually. But I think the point about the community exploiting mechanics, I don't think that's necessarily something you can blame on the community, right, Japes? It feels like surely they're just always going to, it's that path of least resistance thing. They're going to do whatever, unfortunately, they can to kind of have the easiest route to what they want, which for most people, unfortunately, is rewards not a good gameplay experience, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to condition someone and tell people you need to play, like you're playing this game for rewards, and you're going to continue playing this game for rewards and for the shiny cards, the focus is on the shiny cards, not on simulating a game of soccer or football. Like people are focused on the result and not the journey at that point. And if you're focused on the result, you are going to take the most efficient way to get that result. It's just human nature. So we've like all in many ways been conditioned to like win at all costs and like focus on the result. There are some of us that are, I'll include my like purists in some sense that want to like go against the grain for who knows what reason. Who knows? I get insanely frustrated usually about this time of year because my like not anti-meta but like non-meta tactics tend to like start not working as well, and I get super frustrated with it. But we've all been conditioned to just try to use what would be, or for the vast majority of us, like we're just conditioned by EA to focus on the result, and the result is getting top-rated cards and eke out like the best results that you can, which means playing a specific way, playing with a specific style, because anything else you're putting yourself at just a disadvantage.
Yeah.
And it's just the name of the game at this point.
And I guess it's then EA's responsibility to try to make sure that gameplay isn't exploitable or unpleasant, right? Whether that's actually ever possible to some extent. I think maybe that is possible if they released really significant or slightly meta shifting patches so frequently that the meta would take some time to come out. I was thinking that recently. Maybe that would be a way of kind of getting around that to some extent, because I honestly wonder whether it is possible for a football simulator where 10 of your team, give or take, are controlled by the AI to not have some kind of exploits or metas or issues that people can take advantage of.
Yeah, it's hard because I think that, if they were just keeping up with following the meta and then just trying to counteract it, the game would be like drastically changing so much. But I think there's certain things that have been too good for many years now that it's to the point where they either don't want to change it or don't know how to change it. I think it would be interesting to see a Ultimate Team or FIFA edition in general that had the opposite problems that we've had for 6 or 7 years now, that, it's all about like drop back and counter, that like, where the real meta was like being more patient with passing play and, kind of more similar to what we see more often in real life, where most of the top teams are generally dominating the ball. Obviously, when you talk about top team versus top team, it's less likely that one team is totally dominating the ball, but still, I think most of the top teams want to have the ball rather than just playing on the counter. But I think, that is one thing where it's tricky in FUT versus real life. Like in real life, there's only a few like Man City, Arsenal, Real Madrid level clubs, whereas in FUT, like most teams are pretty similar in quality. So it's more like top end Champions League games, not like City versus Bournemouth, like 80% of the ball.
Yeah. Well, also, I guess the games are much shorter. So if a team is able to dominate the ball for a significant amount of time, that becomes a real issue, which isn't necessarily the case in real football. Anything you would add to this, Neil?
I've been playing the same way for many years, so maybe for me it's like a different view, but I think it's mainly just the younger, I think more the older players, they prefer to play their own style. Like it's not just about winning. Maybe this is kind of my take on it. But like obviously when FUT Champ's introduced, it's all about wins, right? It's all about the best rewards. But I think, because if you get like, even if you get rank 1, you're not guaranteed to get anything amazing. It would be nice to see, just if you could play, or maybe if EA interjected a few, like, if there's like some detrimental things that need to be patched, then those should be. But I think it's also an onus of the individual. You all have a choice, right? But as Japes was saying, it's all about the cards at the end of the day. And if someone sees that, oh, look, to get the best possible cards, you need the best possible rank, then they're probably going to abuse the mechanics, to be honest. But I don't know. I just kind of do me. I still play the basic style. I mean, I don't abuse the game and I don't teach it. And that's the way that I teach it. It's, once you get to that level, because when you're in the elite level, like high SR, you've got no choice. You have to abuse it. Like you got no chance, in my opinion. But I think it's kind of a bit of both. I mean, I would love to see EA just patch it and let the gameplay change every 2 weeks. I mean, I don't even care, to be honest. Why not? Let someone find something new and let someone change it up. And I think people disagree with me. I'm sure many people will, but I think it just keeps things fresh. At least you go into the game, you can play base football, you're fine. But if you're just abusing the same thing every single time, then you're screwed. And I think that actually might be a good solution, on my point of view anyway.
Yeah, it is an interesting one because obviously, like, there are a lot of players who don't get that many games in over the course of 2 weeks. So it's probably maybe somewhat unfair if it shifts a lot for them. But I was thinking actually you wouldn't make such sweeping changes that it would change the gameplay for people who are playing in a kind of more casual way. It would be more those metas that develop at the top end, or for people who really go out to find these things, those things would be patched faster. And so those exploits would be things that weren't so easily exploitable. But the problem is, I think maybe the issues in this year's game come from, as James was talking about, this mismatch between attacking and defensive AI, and that's probably a much bigger thing to change. It comes from that hypermotion engine that they've introduced and the issues that arise from that. We'll continue to talk about this, of course, over the course of the rest of the cycle. So if you've heard anything on this podcast that you want to argue against, argue for, or just any other points you want to make on gameplay, then do send them in at FUT Weekly Pod. Hello, a quick message from me, listeners, in this break. A bit of a personal one, actually. Allow me a little bit of a ramble, because I turned 30 last week, and it got me thinking. The podcast has been around since I was, 22, 23, which is a huge part of my 20s. It's been such a big part of it, and that is all thanks to you listeners out there listening along. And I know the supporters often get a lot of the thanks because, yes, they make the podcast sustainable and viable, and I greatly appreciate that. But of course, all you listeners out there are really the bedrock of this podcast. And I know some of you may have been supporters in the past. Maybe it's not something you're able to do anymore. Whatever way you've been part of the podcast, listening, supporting, reviewing the podcast on our podcast, for example, it is so greatly appreciated. And you have made FUT Weekly possible. So thank you very much. And let's get into part 2. So let's dive into part 2 with a question. Raza here saying, I've noticed massively on FIFA 23, there seems to be a slight delay whenever you cut the ball into the box with a winger, midfielder, or fullback. I can guarantee at least once a game, the player receiving the ball, usually the striker in the box, takes an extra touch, and it usually ends up with the keeper smothering it. Is it a limitation or FIFA 23 gameplay, or is there any tips you have for me to try and counter it? It should be an easy tap in, but at the moment it's taking a huge amount of time and the extra touch is sending me mad. I know what he means here. I feel like, I don't know what you think about this, that it is just a thing where you have to press that shoot button way earlier than you actually think.
Yeah, I think especially if it's a short, like if it's really, really a couple of yards, the pass range, as soon as you press that pass button, you have to press the shoot button immediately after, way before the player's even got the ball. I mean, even I admit as well, even I made that mistake as well. Sometimes I'll do a pass and I'll even do the shoot button earlier, but I might have to do it earlier than I actually think. So I think as soon as you press that pass button, as soon as you see that ball leaving that player's foot, then you press that shoot button. In fact, one thing that I was actually trying was, I mean, it depends if you use time shooting or not, but what you can do is pass the ball and then spam the shoot button. But obviously, if you have time shooting on, then you're going to end up having a red time shot. But if you have it off, it could help. So if you predominantly shoot that way and you don't use time shooting, that could be a solution. But yeah, the key thing is as soon as you see that pass left the foot, you then press the shoot button. And you have to do it much earlier than you think. But yeah, I think it's a bit of a game as well. Sometimes I think I do it, or maybe in my eyes, I do it early as I can. And sometimes still, the player still takes a touch. And when I watch it back, you can see I've already registered the shot before the ball's got there. And sometimes the game just fumbles it up. So I think it's kind of a bit of both.
That's true. Hugh, I was just thinking about this. And I mean, is there maybe an argument to switch your pass receiver lock from late to early, maybe? And that would allow you to take control of the player receiving the pass quicker. And so it might help.
Maybe. I've always used late for the pass receiver lock. What I was going to say is pretty much what Neil said. Just if it's really an issue for you, just turn off timed finishing and spam it. I feel like that's really the easiest solution, especially if you don't really use timed finishing often or you're not that great at it. And this is like really a prevailing issue. I guess you could also, I mean, if the situation allows for it, you could try to play the pass with a bit less power to give yourself more time. Obviously, if it's like a tight space, then that's kind of hard to do. But yeah, I mean, really, that's the main thing. I would say worst case, you could also, if you really are recognizing specific situations, then just kind of plan for that to be the case and like take your touch in a way that like opens up the shot from the touch rather than like just pointing at goal and dribbling straight into the keeper or something like that.
Yeah, and actually, I guess James has probably covered this, but I did have something else to ask you. Just kind of how important it is, and I notice you're always going for this on your tactics, to have comes for crosses and sweeper keeper on your keeper and be aggressive with charging the keeper, because you can stop players scoring cutbacks, by being aggressive with that, right?
Look, a lot of people score from cutbacks, and comes for crosses is going to help with cutbacks, and sweeper keeper is going to help with counters. So those are pretty common meta ways to score, and there's a option that allows you to counteract those a little bit. So you might as well have them. I think that with the sweeper keeper thing too, I am oftentimes very aggressively calling my keeper out as soon as I know that I've been beaten. Like if I see the pass coming, and as soon as the ball leaves the player's foot and I know my backline's going to be beaten, I am calling the keeper out. You're trying to like surprise them, which is why I absolutely love keepers that are rapid. Like if a keeper has like a high sprint speed or high pace, I'm here for that.
It's interesting as well, Neil. I'm guessing you probably noticed this, but chip shots are quite easy after they patched them a little while ago at close range if the keeper is coming out and you get a bit of power on it. But they have no power from distance, right? At all. And that means that if you bring your keeper out aggressively and they come to the edge of the box, the chances of a defender actually clearing it off the line are, I mean, it's basically 100% chance, right? So yeah, it's well worth charging your keeper.
Yeah, I mean, personally, like as Jape said, I do the same thing what he does, but I just prefer to be manual about it. So whereas he has sweeper keeper, I just prefer to have control myself, just because certain situations, if I'm using like teammate contain or partial team press, I kind of sometimes don't want the goalkeeper to move. Or let's say if I'm expecting, you know, some advanced players do like a first pass and they do like a second pass to get that shot. So that's why I just like to have the control myself. In terms of chips, I mean, me personally, when I'm defending them, I always do the fake bring the goalkeeper out a little bit if there's loads of space. But I'll be honest, I don't chip that much. For me, even now, still, I found that if the goalkeeper does come rushing out, and one of my biggest gripes about how effective goalkeepers are when they come out, maybe I'm always just a bit too late, but I always find that my chips, they just don't beat the player. I'd rather just ball roll the goalkeeper. So admittedly, I don't use chips that much. So I can't really comment on that too much, to be fair.
I was just going to say, there's like a sweet spot for chips where you are coming into a one-on-one interaction with the keeper, like maybe just outside or like just at the 18-yard box. You can do it and like dink him still in other spots, but that's like the absolute sweet spot is when someone calls the keeper late and your attacking player is like right at the 18-yard box. It's very, very easy then to chip the keeper.
Just wanting to ask that quickly. Yeah, I think you're right on that one. I think the only time that I do use it is I'm going kind of like if I'm running towards the corners of the box, not kind of straight on towards goal. And then, you know, if previously in the game, the opponent has moved the goalkeeper to the left or to the right, what I normally would do then is then chip the ball, because then the animation, they kind of swift to the left and to the right, and then they try to run back. So you normally beat the keeper that way. So if someone is moving the goalkeeper quite a lot during the game to the left and to the right, and then they bring them out, I normally try to outsmart them in that way. So yeah, I would say around that area is where if I do use it, that would be the place that I would use it. But I mainly use it like in diagonal situations, just because you have a bit more space.
Yeah, and then I was going to ask you, Neil, actually, are you encouraging people to time finish this cycle? Because it feels like I was watching the MLS Cup final on the weekend, and yeah, they're all timing pretty much every shot. And actually, something we've mentioned on the podcast before, they do a lot, is the heel ball roll to beat the keeper, which is, I think, very effective and have encouraged in the past. We already have talked plenty about how effective that skill move is just generally, but it's really good for beating the keeper. It kind of reminds me of the ball roll previously. So yeah, Neil, the question to you was basically, do you think that it is worth people, even if they're not so confident with it, learning time finishing?
I personally think you should. I mean, if you can learn it and just, I always say hit it better late. That way you can always hit it green, or best case or worst case is going to be a grey time shot. That's the way that I try to do it.
Yeah, and we should say grey means that
late.
You don't have any
untimed
penalty. Yeah, it is untimed, so there's no penalty to being late, which is really good. Basically, you just want to keep doing it late until you start to feel the right spot for the green.
Yeah, and I think especially when you're under pressure, sometimes you do it a bit. So yellow, in my opinion, is worse than an untimed shot. That's the way I look at it. So red and yellow are no-go zones. Yeah. So it's either going to be grey, which is untimed, or it's just going to be a green time. But I don't know. For me personally, this year, I just think goalkeepers are just so effective when they come out. I think if you're in that 1v1 situation, a lot of the time, if you don't have that angle, or you don't ball roll, or you don't green time it, I think most of the time the goalkeeper's going to save it. So if you do, I would just say try time finishing, but just do it better late. You know, if you do it late, you don't lose anything. That's the way I look at it. So that'll be my advice.
Yeah, I am I am like I don't know. I am a perfect player in the sense of like I should perfect example in the sense that I should like learn to do time finishing, and I'm lazy about it. And so I just like don't learn it because I'm becoming like a curmudgeon. I'm stuck in my FIFA ways, and it is what it is. But the point that I'll make here is when I come up against someone who is of unequal skill level to myself across every other aspect, but they can time finish, I lose 100% of the time.
Yep. It's huge. I agree. I've come up against people like that as well, right? They're not, apparently there is some, there's too many PC cheats going on, but apparently there's a cheat where people can green time every time or something.
Yeah, on PC.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Even if they're like slightly worse, you just convert so many more chances when you've learned to do that. Like the quality of shot is so noticeable, even visually, that you're like, I can't aggressively defend because if they get a good look, chances are it's going in.
And Hugh, you, am I right in thinking, have started learning it recently or not so long ago?
I try to do it when I can. Like if it's like a power shot across goal, like those ones are usually pretty easy because there's not like too many players around you. You can like see it very clearly. Obviously some people can like do it on every shot, which is kind of crazy, but
yeah,
I try to do it when I can.
Yeah, same. I've found it so good. I'm doing it more and more. I think it's something that we should just quickly clear up for those who are maybe unclear about how to start doing it. You do need to, I think, enable it in the settings menu in the controller settings. I believe it's currently off by default, or at least it's not like recommended for some reason. I guess because you can miss shots by spamming and things like that. But you do need to, I think, enable it or just check it's enabled. And then Neil, just a reminder, I think you said it earlier, what's the best way to turn that second shoot button press into a time finish?
The best bet is to start late and then kind of bring it back. What I would advise when you're learning it is that once your player's already hit the ball, try timing it like that, and you'll always hit it late, and then you can kind of tone it back ever so slightly to where you're just about to hit the ball. Is kind of where you want to, within those ranges. But personally, I wouldn't put the kind of the visual HUD on. I think it actually distracts you too much, and it doesn't really help you because you can't use it in FUT Champs and Rivals anyway.
That makes sense. We're going to go on to talk about, Neil, your 352, because I know a few supporters have been using it, and I'd like to talk to you about it. But I think, Japes, you might have to head off. Is that right? I know you got to go a bit early.
That is correct, Ben. I will be taking off now. So it's been a pleasure chatting with you guys. I will be listening back to learn more about this 352 because the 𝘵ci 352 is always something that's good with FIFA.
Yeah, and if people are missing you at the end here and want to catch a bit more of your insight on FIFA, they can find your newsletter, right?
Yes, they can. It's p2psnacks.substack.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at AirJapes.
There we go. Well, we can move on to that 352 then. People can obviously find the full details on Neil's YouTube channel. We'll be discussing it in depth here though. And the interesting thing about this actually is that it involves players dropping back to form a 4-4-2 in defense, and that's something that Hugh, you did and talked about on the podcast a few weeks ago. But it's interesting, Neil, you did this in a 3-5-2 rather than 3-4-2-1, and in my head the 3-4-2-1 makes a little bit more sense because you've got a lot of wide players to drop back in. But how are you doing this in your tactic, Neil?
Funny enough, my next video next week is on the 3-4-2-1 defending in a 4-4-2.
Okay.
They are both similar, yes. In my one, when people watch it, probably think, why on earth would you do it that way? Because I have one of my strikers that comes back. The one that make the downside is, of course, you get counter-attacked. But what I found, a lot of players, if you give an average person that formation, they score a lot of counter-attacks. And people nonchalantly, they know how formations play. But when you have like these variation movements, people can't read it as well. And I think that's the reason why I did that way. But in my case, in my 3-5-2, the right mid ends up dropping in to create the right back, and then that creates the back four line. And then the cam and one of the strikers, so the cam can become the right mid, and then one of the strikers, for example, can become a left mid. And then the left mid in the 3-5-2, hope this is not too confusing, but the left mid in the 3-5-2 is on stay forward. So the idea is you kind of have this cross movement, but it's also the way how your opponent's AI reacts to it as well. because sometimes a CDM can get drawn across, especially if they haven't got cut past lanes, they've got it unbalanced. And I think that if a player does use the L1 triggers as well and manually pushes those players going forward, it makes it very effective. But as I've always said, the 3-5-2 is still, in my opinion, top 3 formations in the game. I know the pro scene doesn't really see it as much compared to last year, but I still think it is. And equally, the 3-4-2-1 is also very, very good. But I just prefer the 3-5-2 because you got that 2 strikers, and of course you have that cam player. Whereas in the 3-4-2-1, I believe with the center mid, I think you need to involve them a bit more into the game. Or if their strikers are isolated, let's say.
Because it's interesting. I know, Hugh, we've talked a lot about free at the back. Do you feel like with the right instructions and tactics, it is something you're like happy to play? Because I've still myself, when I've been playing it, kind of struggled defensively, to be honest. I mean, maybe I need to just let go of the fact that I tend to play press after possession loss, or tend to play 71 depth or above. Maybe that's the issue. But yeah, how have you found it? Have you found it exposes you too much?
It can a bit, like on the counter, down the wings. It kind of depends on how the opponent's playing. But I think that player switching in 3 at the back is actually pretty difficult. Like just the way that like the positioning of the 3 center backs can be kind of weird. And I think that's partly why defending in like a sort of 4-4-2, like Neal's been describing, is helpful, because like the players are just in like more logical positions, like when you're player switching, as well as like covering runs and filling certain gaps, like on the counter and things like that. That it just seems like when you're playing like a real 3 at the back, even if you have both wide players coming back to make a kind of 5, like it's a similar issue where like the player switching is just a little weird, which can be difficult to get used to, but even then it's just like not quite as good in my opinion. I also think that part of the issue is that real like 3 at the backs are very much countered by 4-2-2, which is like very common this year. So having it defend in more of like a 4 at the back, I think helps a lot to like man-to-man markup against like a 4-2-2.
It's just something also to note on that. The reason, so I have another 3-5-2 where it defends in 5-3-1-1. That's a really good formation, but also the center mids. What I found is when I want to defend in a 4-4-2, it's for 2 reasons. It's because with a 3-5-2, you can't press that well. And I think you have your 2 CDMs and they're a bit too far away. And then you have like the 3 players up front. And I feel like the wide areas, you can't, especially if you're dealing with overlaps or a 4-3-2-1, for example, it's quite hard to defend against that. So defending in a 4-4-2 allows you to press better, but also, as you said, people are using the 4-2-2 quite a lot in the 4-4-2s. So you can kind of man for man match up for it as well. So the only real thing with that formation is if you lose the ball, that's where you may get counter-attacked. So some players, if you prefer like a 5 back, just for like a solid back 5, with like a lower width, you may prefer traditional defending in a 3-5-2. But if you like to press a bit more and you like to kind of match up for your opponent man for man, I'd recommend then using the 4-4-2, well, where it defends in the 4-4-2, should I say rather?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I was going to add to that, it's interesting in terms of the tactics you have set. Do you want to just like run through them? Of course, people can head to your video, right, to see a full explanation, full tactics, instructions and everything. Your channel is NealGuides. But for the sake of the podcast, it would be interesting if you just run through the tactics that are on that.
Yeah, so for the defense, I think the main key ones is the defensive style. Don't use pressure on heavy touch, because when you lose that ball, your team is going to be transitioning into a 4-4-2. If you lose the ball and you're on pressure on heavy touch, your players are then going to press, and if you don't get the ball during the press, you'll take even longer. So I would say if you were going to use a defensive style, pressure on heavy touch is the maximum I would go, but I would recommend balanced. The width and the depth are pretty balanced. So you got 45 on the width, 47 on the depth. Don't forget you are defending in a 4-4-2 here. And don't forget, depth only affects your defensive depth, not how far you are when you're attacking. Remember that. And then for the build-up play, it's long ball. Long ball is also very important, because when you make that transition, and because as I said, like, your left mid is kind of on stay forward. So when you get the ball, you want those players to run into the positions quicker. So long ball just helps that. Think of long ball as get in behind. And then for the chance creation, I personally have forward. I think a lot of people are now changing more to forward runs. I think a lot of people, they see the pro players use direct pass and they think, oh, that's the way to go. But personally, I prefer forward runs much better than direct passing. I just think it has more attacking options. It's a bit more attacking. And then for the attacking width, we got it on 55. I think it's pretty balanced. If you are using hug the sidelines, you can just make the team attack wider, so you don't have to really change that too much. And the plays in the box, you can actually use whatever you want, but I think 5 or 6 is kind of a good balance, I would say, with a 3-5-2.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, no, that is interesting. I mean, I have such a tendency to want to win the ball back straight away, to be quite aggressive, so I tend to play like 71 depth, and also press after possession loss, but like I've found it very difficult to do in 3 at the back tactics, and I think that's been like the issue I've had getting countered because of that when playing 3 at the back. So I may give this a go and maybe it'll work well. So interested to try it. I'm sure listeners out there will be as well. Do you have any particular tips actually for defending in a 3 at the back, or starting out defending in a 3 at the back, I guess, because you're going into a 4-4-2 type shape, just before we wrap up here?
In terms of the defending with a 3-5-2, that's why I say don't keep the depth too high. You don't want to be going towards the automatic offside territory. But the key with the back 3 is you have to wait for that right mid to come into position. That's why if you can get the paciest player there with high work rates, it's probably the best situation there. You want that player to come back as quick as possible to reunite and make the back 4. In my opinion, when you lose the ball, always run back first. A lot of players, as I was saying early on, Jake was saying, yes, you can be aggressive, and that is correct. But a lot of players, they misjudge when to be aggressive. They end up running out with their CDM, mainly because they're frustrated. And then what happens is they get isolated. They only have 3 players at the back and they're waiting. Even if you're playing a regular 3-5-2, you're waiting for that left mid or right mid to come back. It takes some time. So my opinion is if you lose the ball in 3-5-2, just run back with your CDM directly in the middle first. I would say that way you can, because if someone is using, for example, a 4-3-2-1 with 3 players on stay forward, you could be on a 3 versus 3 situation. So I would say always defend the middle first and then think about being aggressive. It's better to kind of win the ball actually when your opponent's in your half, because it's better for counter-attacking than winning it straight away, because your right mid is already out of position. You might have the good left-hand side, but is it worth the risk of losing the goal? In my opinion, not so much.
Yeah, and then just finally, I guess, Hugh, anything to add on the defending in a 3 and anything that people might want to know?
Those are really the main things. I would say, as Neil said, if you're not pressing aggressively, then your first step when you lose the ball, it should be running backwards and getting more defensively solid. Like I see people who don't use like press after possession loss, but then they lose the ball and they're just like switching players and sprinting right at the ball. And like if you beat that person, then it's just like easy. Like you're in on goal, but practically. Like you need to either commit to press or don't, and don't just try to drag people out of position and do it on your own. Especially in transition. Like if you pull a center back out, your CDM might not automatically step into that space. So then you just have a completely open, like middle of the pitch.
Yeah, no, again, good advice. I think people will be able to take something away from that. And yeah, if you want more advice, then there's an extra podcast every week, as I always say, for supporters. It's just £3 a month. And yeah, you get double the podcast content every week. Supporters are keeping the podcast going. And if you'd like to join them, if you haven't done so already, then do head over to the Patreon. You can just search Support FUT Weekly or follow the link in the description of this podcast, or go to bit.ly/morepod. Right then, thank you very much, first of all, to NealGuides for coming on this podcast.
Thank you very much for having me on, as usual.
Yeah, very welcome. People can catch Neil's YouTube over at NealGuides. And Hugh, thank you very much for coming on as well.
Yeah, thank you for having me on both podcasts this week. It was a good time. If anyone has any questions, feel free to message me in the FUT Weekly Discord.
Yeah, indeed. And worth reminding people, as always, if you're a gold or above supporter, you've got access to the Discord. Do check it out. And if you're having trouble accessing it, you can go to bit.ly/pod Discord help. That's bit.ly/pod Discord help. And final plug from me then, if you're listening on YouTube, then do subscribe, leave a comment, drop a like, all those YouTubery things. It really does actually help. So that's great if you could do that. And of course, if you're listening on the podcast providing platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, do subscribe so you get the podcast into your feed and it will download for you, all that good stuff. And finally then, thank you very much to all those supporters keeping the podcast going, as I said, and to those icon patrons. Dave B, Hugh J, Coach 𝘵𝘀, DJ FIFA Player, Alan G, Alistair, Anthony R, Dominic P, Rob P, Jeff B, Stephen F, Tom B, Damon H, David S, Nick Jack M, Eric T, Neil P, Adam G, Dan W, Waterman, N Hagman, Harry A, Jake G, Roger D, Springford, Elec, Bracco, Nishant, Harry P, Alex M, Lee A, Brendan W, Andrew C, Joe W, Timothy J, Dylan, Adam R, Sam K, Graham W, Andy, Ads H2K, and Brian V. Plus a special thanks to Luke M, Dave B, Hugh J, Tom M, Darren W, and Pato Foot for advice and production assistance. Before I leave you, just one more thing to add though. FIFA's a bit like life really. It has its many ups and its many downs. If you're having a few more downs than ups in real life in these more difficult times, then please don't feel that you're alone or need to struggle on without taking action. If you go to thecalmzone.net, there's loads of resources, advice, support, or even just a friendly chat for anyone who needs it. If it sounds like it could help you, then head over to thecalmzone.net. And for now, have a good one, and I'll catch you on the next podcast.